The project core plans. The project core plans are the plans that we need to manage the core processes that we have in the project. These core processes are scope, schedule, budget, and quality, and they are related to the project constraints. And these are very integrated. That's why they're called core plans, because whenever you develop one of these plans, they are related to each other. That means that if you start developing your scope and managing your scope, any changes on that will have an impact on the other two elements and eventually also an impact on the quality. And that's important to understand when you're managing these plans, that they are integrated. They are not independent. You're going to have your schedule on one side and your budget on the other side. Whatever happens in one or the other will impact all of these plans. So as you start making progress and developing your plans, make sure that you have enough time to look at them and make sure they are integrated. The first one is the scope management plan. It's going to define the processes and procedures for confirming, verifying, and controlling project scope. That means managing all the work that you have in your project. For that, we're going to look at the logical framework. We're going to look at the work breakdown structure and then change control. The logical framework is the document that structures the main elements in the project and the logical linkages between them. This is the logic of the project. This is how the project was designed. It defines all the activities that are needed to produce outputs that will eventually produce outcomes. So that is the logic that we have designed in the project, and they become the basis for scope management plans. One of those tools that we're going to use is the work breakdown structure. That is also known as the WBS. And it's a graphical representation of all the work in your project in a hierarchical layers, meaning on the top you will have your goal, then your outcomes, your outputs, and all the activities on your project. And when you start planning and you start developing a WBS, you can use many tools to do that. The idea is to create something that is graphical, that the project team can look at it and have a good understanding of what we need to do in order to achieve the outputs, the outcomes of the goal of the project. And it's also a good exercise for them to start looking at their ownership in some of those activities. The next element of the scope management plan is the scope change control. Documents the process to evaluate whether or not the requests are within the project scope, defines how approved requests are prioritized and scheduled, and explains the roles and responsibilities for each participant in the scope management process. The idea is not to stop changes from happening. If the changes to scope add value, then they are welcome, but they need to go to a process. And the idea behind that is that when we presented the first slide with the constraints and the triangle, if we're going to be making changes to the scope, we need to understand what are going to be implications to the budget, to the schedule, and to quality. So we need to create a simple process in which we can evaluate that request for change. And the request can come from the team, from the donor, from beneficiaries, or any other key stakeholder. And that has to go to that process. We first review the request, we analyze it, we look at the impact, the benefits of that change in the project, if there's going to be an impact to the schedule and the budget, and there is a process of approval. Depending on the levels of authority, sometimes it would be the project manager or even all the way up to the donor who will approve that change. But we need to have something on the project that allows us to manage those requests for changes. The next plan is our schedule management plan. So that's where we're going to define the process, procedures for updating, verifying, monitoring all our project schedule. So we have information about our estimates. We know how each one of those activities are going to take. We also need to have information about the dependencies among those activities, information about specific milestones, information about how we're going to create a baseline, and the resources and people assigned to those activities. And that has an implication to time, and we'll look at that a little bit later. Two tools that we can use for that. One is the network diagram that will help us identify the critical path, and the Gantt diagram. The first one is in the network diagram. It is a representation of all the activities in your project and how they are dependent on each other. In this simple example, we have a start of the project and at the end, the finish of the project. And we have a series of activities. Each activity has a duration, 4 days, 3 days, and so on. And when we start looking at how they are connected, the dependencies, meaning that I first need to do this activity and then I do the next one and then I finish my work. In this other path, I begin my project, I spend 2 days on this work, and then I continue to the next activity for another 2 days, I go to the next activity for another days, and then I complete that piece of work. So eventually you have a diagram with all the paths in your project from all the activities, and they're all connected with each other. They are dependencies. The network with the longest duration is known as the critical path. And it's critical because if there is any changes in the durations of that, any delays on that, that will impact the duration of the project. Right now, the duration of my project, based on this example, is 7 days. That is my critical path. If I delay this activity for an extra day, so instead of 3 days, it will take me 4 days to do it, then the duration of my project will be pushed, meaning now it will be 8 days long. And that has a problem. The other paths in the example below, they take 2 days, 2 days, 6 days total. If this activity is delayed by another day, the total will be only 7 days. Compared to my critical path, it doesn't have an impact on the duration and the final date of my project. Only those activities in the critical path, if they are delayed, they will have an impact on the final date of my project. And that means that as a project manager, that will be the area that I need to focus. Once I identify my critical path, then I can make sure that those activities are not going to take longer than what was planned. The Gantt diagram is a graphical representation of our schedule. We know we have all the information that we need at this moment, but it helps us represent by the use of bars the duration of each activity, when they will start, when they will end, and I can even include information about the percentage it was completed when I start implementing my project. It also gives me some information about the predecessor activities, activities that come before, and activities that will come after, and I can even add information about the resources. Let me show you another example. This is using a software program where I can then identify my WBS, the different tasks that I have, or the activities on my project, and the activities are all connected by their dependencies, and we can start looking at them and see where they're going to be happening. I can have it structured by month, or by period, or by week, and I can see how long the different elements of my project will take. Depending on the nature of my project, I might have different lines are happening, different diagrams that are going to be happening, showing me when things are going to be happening. And this is a good tool that you can use to put on your project office, print it and make it available to everybody in the team, so they have an idea, they have an understanding on when that an activity will start and when it will end. Again, it is a tool that helps you visualize your project, and also we'll use it during the monitoring phase to keep track of where we are against what we planned. The next plan is our budget management plan. That's when we're going to be looking at controlling our project budget. We know we have information about the estimates, the cost of each one of those activities. We also need to have information about contract clauses, the process and the levels of authorizations for any changes on the budget, reporting requirements, information about disbursements. And we'll use two basic tools. One of those is going to be the chart of accounts, and the other one is going to be the S-curve. The chart of accounts is a basic representation of how you plan to spend your money. So you have a budget and you organize it by the account number. This is an accounting number, usually provided either by the donor or by your organization. describes the component or the area of that account. And you can have a periods. In this case, we're going to look at 6 months. And the information that we have is, first, how much we're planning to spend each month on the activity and the account 5100s. We plan to spend this amount, and as we start making progress, every month we start collecting the data, the actual expenditures we made. So by the end of month 3, right here, we see that we plan to spend 150, but we actually spend 120. That means that my burn rate, the rate at which I'm spending the money, is 80%, meaning that I'm spending less than what I actually plan. In another example, I can look that I have 90,000 planned for the project for that specific period of time, and I see that I have spent 110 for that period of time, meaning that now I'm spending more than I planned. So my burn rate is going to be higher. And this is a simple tool that as a project manager I can use to track and monitor my expenditures in the project, and it help me identify where I may be having problems and how I can then come back with solutions to change and improve the process of managing my budget. The S-curve is another interesting tool. What it does is that it is a graphical representation of the cumulative planned cost of your project. And it looks like this. It's a curve that goes like that. And what it means that as I plan my project, every month I accumulate all the values. And I can see at the beginning that some of those costs are not happening too much because I'm starting the project, so I'm not spending that much. Then I go to the cycle in which I'm going to plan to spend more during that cycle. And at the end of the project, I know that we're not going to spend that much because eventually we run out of the activities we need to perform. We're just closing the project. So this is a tool that we use to plan how we're going to be planning the expenditures on the project. And we use it as we start making progress. We start charting the actual costs, and it could be a curve that looks like this. What it means is that at the beginning you started to look at, you spent less than what you planned. So you were not spending fast enough as you originally planned. Then later you see that you're spending more than what you planned. Both situations have consequences to the project, and it's important to look at charts like this and information like that so you can make corrective actions before it's too late. That information, like on the other charts, are useful in terms of monitoring how your project is performing from what you plan to what actually is happening. The last plan is the quality management plan, and we're going to look at how we control project quality. What are the things we need to know or have an understanding if there are any quality objectives, if there are any standards or policies that apply to our project, inspections and control, the whole process and how we're going to be controlling and inspecting depending on the project, if there are any tests and an approval process, and the use of quality control charts. Again, depending on the type of project, there might be different requirements in terms of quality. Sometimes you might have specific quality standards that are being required by either the donor or even the local government. A quality control chart basically helps you monitor how your data is being used by what are you producing in the project. And identifies some limits on your project that you use to monitor whether or not what you're producing in your project, the deliverables of your project, are within those limits. And as you start making progress, you start looking at the data points that you have, and eventually you hit a moment where you see, I have a problem. Something is happening, our previous deliverables were within the limits, something happened, now we are much lower and we're having a problem. That is the opportunity for the team to look back, see how our processes are doing, what we need to improve, what we need to change, so that the next cycle, then you're back into the areas where your quality is within those limits. This is one of the tools. There are many others, but basically these are how the elements that you can start planning to monitor and have better control on the quality of your project. Unlike any other tools that we have for the core project management plans, the idea behind that is that what we plan and then what we monitor help us then identify the deviations and make corrective actions.